So we do have one more study here that I want to connect back to Daniel 7. We introduced this last Wednesday, or a couple Wednesdays ago now, wasn't it? Where Daniel had a vision where he saw what he called one like the Son of Man. And the importance of this, of course, is that Jesus is going to use that designation to refer to himself more than any other self-designation. He referred to himself as the Son of Man. And it's very important to see where that comes from, because it helps us to understand something about Jesus's, his work and his person, his identity, and what he thought of himself, and then, of course, why others became so agitated at Jesus and some of the things that he said about himself. But it goes back to here. It goes back to Daniel chapter 7 and verse 13, where Daniel says, I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. And it says, he came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. So what Daniel is seeing is this human figure. That's what he means by a Son of Man, one like the Son of Man. This is a human. But the surprising thing about it is that he's in heaven, and he's going through this council room, or what we see in Revelation as the throne room of God, and he's actually bypassing all the angelic creatures, and he's going all the way up to the throne of God himself. It's like, well, here's somebody who is being exalted and elevated above all the angelic creatures. And it's not an angel, it's a man. And he's brought before what the figure is called the Ancient of Days. That's a way to refer to the eternal God. He is seated on the throne, and he's the eternal God, and yet this man is brought before him. And it says in verse 14, then to him, that is to this Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples and nations which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. Now those are two ways of saying the same thing, right? His dominion is an everlasting, will not pass away, and his kingdom will not be destroyed. It's the same thing. In other words, there's a human being that is on the throne with God, at the right hand of God, as we'll read in other passages, but that just means he wields the power of God Almighty, and he rules. And so Jesus, as I say in the notes here, his favorite self-designation was this title, the Son of Man. And he's referring to all that's entailed right here in Daniel, something Daniel saw 600 years before Jesus was even born. So Jesus comes and does his ministry and saying, I am the Son of Man. Well, that implies a lot. Now, there are lots of ways that you can refer to Jesus, a lot of ways that the New Testament, but here was Jesus' most often used self-identification. And so I say there under letter A at number 1, with this self-designation, Jesus, I've typed this in a hurry, sorry. Jesus is identifying himself as the Son of Man described in Daniel 7. Daniel sees a vision of the Ancient of Days, that is God, on his throne when one like a Son of Man, that would be a human, is brought before him and exalted as ruler over his kingdom. Daniel here is speaking from the perspective of the throne room of God. Now, I use that phrase, the same room, the same scene. He says there was a door open in heaven, and there was somebody sitting on the throne, and around were 24 thrones, and there were thrones all around, and elders and creatures and strange-looking creatures. Well, Daniel saw that, and John sees that. But the point we're making here is that the one who is exalted in the highest position in that whole room, and he claims to be that one. Well, that's a huge claim. I mean, if you're not really the Son of Man in Daniel, then you're pretty blasphemous in claiming to be at the right hand of God, have all the power of God. And so Daniel here is, sometimes when we hear about Jesus coming, sometimes the Bible is talking about him coming back to earth. But there are places where Jesus is going to use phraseology from this vision, talking about him coming in power or coming on the clouds and such. And he's not referring strictly to coming back at the last day. He's talking about being enthroned. He's talking about showing his power and authority over the world by his judgments from his throne. And we'll have occasion to mention a little bit more about that in a moment. God to receive power and authority over the kingdom. And I say, of course, this did happen when? Number 3. At the ascension. What's that? 40 days after he was resurrected. So in Acts chapter 1, whenever he took his disciples out on the Mount of Olives and he ascended into heaven and on a cloud and disappeared, you remember? And the angel said, he went into heaven on a cloud. Now, he will come back in the same way, like on a cloud. But here he went into heaven. Well, where did he go? Right there. This is what Daniel saw.
Okay, is this when he went?
I don't know, has he?
Well,
I mean the ultimate second coming, when he comes to end.
Yes, but when he went here at the ascension, he has not come back to earth, but he stayed 40 days after his resurrection.
Right. Now, if we want to say, he appeared to the Apostle Paul on the road to Damascus.
Okay.
So we might want to say there was this special thing. Stephen in Acts 7 was being stoned to death, and he said, I see the Son of God standing at the right hand in a vision when he was dying. But as far as coming back to the earth, there's probably, Paul said, I was one born out of due season as an apostle. So maybe is there any other time? Now, he appeared to Paul also, I guess, in a dream later on in the book of Acts.
But he hasn't.
Does anybody else got any other ideas in the
Walk among men.
in the book of Revelation?
Right, and just because it's not recorded doesn't we don't know.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, what do we know in the Bible? Yeah, he appeared to John, but these would have been visions. These were apocalyptic visions. But I'm sorry.
We know that he's not Paul off the horse.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So he appeared to Paul,
Not him off the horse.
but other than that, he hasn't been back. Now, there is a sense in which he has returned. Now, he returned in AD 70, so to speak, to destroy the temple in Jerusalem. And he made that prediction in Matthew 24 that we're going to look at in a moment, if we get there. Yes?
Did Paul and Jesus talk when he appeared there?
Yeah. Well, they're kind of lopsided, but yeah. Jesus said, "Why are you persecuting me?" And then Paul said, "Who are you, Lord?" He said, "I'm Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But go into the next city and wait there, and it'll be told what you must do." So there was that discussion. Yep. But it wasn't exactly like a post-mortem appearance like it was during the 40 days after the resurrection. One reason I say that is because the people who were with Paul, they didn't see. It says they heard a voice, but they didn't see the form of who it was there. Now, maybe they were blind, like there's something a little bit different going on there, but Paul seems to count it as a resurrection appearance. He says, maybe he does, Paul say, last of all, he appeared to me. And this is 1 Corinthians chapter 15. He was seen by Cephas, then by the 12. He was seen by over 500 brethren at once. And after that, he was seen by James, and then by all the apostles. And last of all, he was seen by me also, as one who was born. And that was a special one-time thing after the ascension. Why y'all get me into all these detailed discussions that I can't shut up on? But no, I do appreciate the questions, and I need to learn how to be much more concise. Okay, so you're seeing the context here of Daniel 7. Daniel is seeing the ascension of Jesus to the right hand of the throne and receiving a kingdom, which, as we say, began there following that ascension, and then in Acts chapter 2 when Peter preaches there. Now, with that phrase, and I'm going to focus now on the book of Matthew, because this will help us see the New Testament explanation or application of this Son of Man idea. This is what we've been doing, by the way, in these several classes, looking at these Old Testament covenants, or now the predictions in Daniel, and seeing how the New Testament applies them to us today. And here's how I have the outline on your handout. Letter B and C. We're going to look at the importance of Jesus' identity. And of course, it's going to be the importance of what you believe about it, because that's going to be the identity of Jesus. And then the implications of the truth of his identity and whether or not you believe in him. Okay, so first, the importance of Jesus' identity. So here we're going to focus on the teaching of Matthew. Notice that Matthew is going to record all these different groups of people and types of people in his gospel and what they think about Jesus of Nazareth. So here's a man who he's going on a ministry. He's a personal ministry. He's a rabbi, and he's gaining a following. Months ago, we finished a study of the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 7 is the final chapter of that. And we pointed out those last two verses where Matthew says in Matthew 7, 28 and 29, "So it was when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his teaching." And it says, because he taught them as one having authority, and not like the scribes. So people could hear religious teaching almost any time they wanted. They could go. And I'm sure it's not just the great truths that he taught, but it says here, he taught them as one having authority. That means one who claimed to have inherent authority. Does that make sense? He's the one, he gives us teaching about God, and he doesn't say, this is what Rabbi Shammai has said. This isn't some human tradition passed down. That's the way all the other teachers taught, because that's how they had to prove their points. This is a school of teaching that's respected in Israel, from Shammai or Hillel or any of these other rabbis. But Jesus he didn't do that. In fact, in this gospel, in this Sermon on the Mount, how did Jesus teach? You might have heard it said, "I say to you, such and so." He didn't appeal to any, he's claiming authority of himself. And that's what astonished these people. Well, so here almost the rest of Matthew is going to be going, now who is this man? Some people have good insight, some people are right, some people are wrong, some people are confused. In fact, and we're going to have to be a little bit quicker about this, look at the next chapter 8, and verses 23 through 27 is where Jesus stills the storm on the Sea of Galilee in front of these disciples, right? But look at verse 27. It says, "So the men marveled." What does that mean? They were astonished. They were in awe. And it says, they said, "What kind of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" So they're asking that question. What manner of man is this? If you're magicians can, take a rabbit out of a hat. But no magician I've ever seen has calmed the storm that is enveloped the Sea of Galilee. I've never seen that. So there's the question that's arose. Now you have various opinions. In fact, just a couple of verses later, talking in verse 29 says, "Suddenly they cried out, saying, 'What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?'" Evidently, the demons had a little bit of special insight. They know who this person is. He has the authority to cast them out by the word, right? By his own word. And so I think they're pretty close to accurate. Of course, James, to save them, they just know who he is and accept his identity. Okay, so you see all the examples I have on your outline. It says, "Who is this man?" Well, the disciples asked that question, and then the answer is given by various different people. So 9:27 is the next one I have. 2 blind men. followed Jesus, and they cried out saying, "Son of David, have mercy on us." Okay? And then, of course, he asked them about their faith in the following verses. But so these blind men seem to have some insight. Isn't that a kind of a oxymoron? These blind men have some insight. But do you think maybe that's a little bit of Matthew's point? Say that we see, you're really blind. Jesus would say that in John, you remember. But if you admit you're blind, then maybe you'll be able to see. It's a reflection of the attitude of the heart. You could look at chapter 11 where John the Baptizer sends his disciples to query Jesus about his identity. We don't have time to get into that. Chapter 12, verse 23. All the multitudes were amazed and said, "Could this be the son of David?" So there's the question again. What about the people? When he had come to his own country, he taught them in their synagogues so that they were astonished. And they said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Isn't this the carpenter's son? And is not his mother Mary and his brother James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, his sisters? They're all here with us. Where then did this man get all these things?" So they're saying, okay, we know this guy. He grew up in this town and he's not a scholar, or, he didn't attend the rabbinical schools. But he's got some ability here to teach and to bring out things with authority. So there's the question. So without getting too bogged down in this, you're seeing some 13. Because here's the question for us all to ask ourselves, that Jesus here in this context is asking his disciples. In Matthew 16:13, Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, and he asked his disciples, saying, "Who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am?" So Jesus is already designating himself as who he is. He knows who he is. But he's asking, what's the opinions of the people? Well, verse baptizer raised from the dead. Remember, he said that back in chapter 14, verse 1. So there's all kinds of opinions, but Jesus asks in verse 15, "But who do you say that I am?" And that's where we kind of want to focus on this. At letter C there, and kind of toward the middle of your page says, "Who is this man to you?" And that's the whole practical application of this. Because, you can say what you want to say about it. Won't it? What do you do? What are you devoted to? What do you aim all of your resources towards? In other words, who is your Lord? Who is your God? Because you can say, "I believe in Jesus Christ," or "I'm a Christian," or whatever you want to say, but that doesn't mean much unless you walk the walk. But so he's asking, and then of course Peter in verse 16 gives the answer and says, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." So there's another answer. And then Jesus, "In blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." So in other words, yes, you're learning from the Father in all of my ministry here, and you are learning the truth. You're not placing your trust in rabbis and all of these other traditions. You're actually following the Lord. And he has led you to me. Okay? And so you have accepted the truth. So what I say here is, this reveals the true identity of Jesus, Son of Man. And then who did Peter say he was? Son of God, the Messiah, the Christ. And so what does that imply? That's who the Son of Man in Daniel 7 is. He's the Son of God. He is the Messiah. He's the Christ. And now we know that he is identified with this Jesus who was born in Nazareth. Born in Bethlehem, grew up in Nazareth, and did his ministry 2,000 years ago, right? And so Jesus, when he claims, "I am the Son of Man," here in his personal ministry, he's basically saying, I will fulfill Daniel's vision of ascending to the right hand of God and ruling over the kingdom. Now, are you with me so far? Thank you for saying that, whoever said that. 24. By the way, I have a list in my office I took, and it's like there's like 25 or 30 times when he refers to himself as the Son of Man in the book of Matthew. But so we got to be very selective. But
I
Matthew,
thought he was saying son of man because he was born of Joseph.
yeah, but he's not. Now we know he's not. And we'll know he's not because especially these two we're going to look at here. Because he's going to quote and allude to Daniel 7, 13, and 14 without question. So in Matthew 24, if you remember, we went over this on Sunday afternoons back in January whenever I was talking about the end times and the rapture theory and things like that from dispensationalists. And so Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And if you look at Matthew 24, verse 30, as he's talking about various signs that will come to pass, he says, man will appear in heaven. That's my translation. Now the Greek text, and you probably have the translation, if it's not the New King James, it's more accurate. It will say, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Because that's the way the Greek has will appears at the beginning of the so it's not saying the sign will appear in the heavens. It's saying there's going to be a sign that's going to appear, and that sign is going to point to the fact that the Son of Man is now in heaven. Does that make sense? In other words, Daniel's prophecy is being, then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all of the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with great power and glory. And he will send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to another. So you're seeing a heavenly vision in what Jesus is saying. And that he's borrowing all of this from Daniel 7. Now, there's one other place that we want to look at, and then you can ask questions if you want. Questions that I'm sure I can't answer. But nonetheless, you are seeing that Jesus is referring to Daniel 7 here. And now it's at his trial. So in Matthew 26, you remember he's going to tear this temple down and so forth. But Jesus never answered them. And then finally in verse 63, it says, Jesus kept silent, and the high priest answered and said to Jesus, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, when the high priest does this, Jesus has to speak. You can't be silent or you'll be in contempt. And so he put him under oath. So Jesus now has to speak up and answer. And Jesus says, you say correctly. That's what is meant by you said it. You say correctly. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man. Other way around, that's Daniel 7, 13 and 14. The question is, how is that fulfilled? What does it mean? And what are the implications? Okay? Yeah.
I was just going to say, I like reading all of that paired with the Gospel of Mark.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Mark, you read the early chapters of Mark, and anytime he heals someone or he gets a demon out of somebody, he tells them, don't tell anyone who did this to you. And the reason being, and I'm going to put my class here a little bit, just slightly bit. Like we talked about in class, my class, is the fact that these people are waiting for their own version of their Messiah. The Son of Man that they think is going to come in and conquer the earthly kingdoms and establish their own earthly kingdom. But if you look throughout Jesus' ministry, whenever people get healed or whenever they tell him, well, you're the Son of Man. And he's like, well, is that what people say? He's like, because he's wanting to define his own messiahship. Mm-hmm. Because he's coming for a different reason than they think he's coming for. So I think it's really interesting that I don't know if this is the first time he answers someone directly and says, yes, I'm the Son of Man that is speaking about in Daniel. But hey, is that really what you think I am, the Son of Man? Based upon what you've seen, and I'm going to allude to it a bunch, but I'm not going to tell you for sure. I want you to decide that. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not here to conquer like you think I am, but it's for a different reason. But then you get to the high priest and he goes, are you the Son of Man? And he has to answer, and he's like, well, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's several aspects to this, what you described is called the messianic secret. Like, why would Jesus tell people not to tell other people who he was? Because we're thinking of it from terms of the Great Commission, right? You got to go tell everybody in the world, but it wasn't always that way. And without getting into all of the reasons why Jesus did that, because he did have his reasons as to why he kept a messianic secret. Carter is pointing out here that in Matthew, we reach this apex in the trial where he is put under oath and he has to respond or he'd be in contempt. And so he actually does respond. And when he says, you say correctly, he is saying, yes, I am the Son of God. Jesus identifying himself with that Daniel vision as somebody who's going to be exalted over the kingdom of God, which would make, of course, Jesus over the high priest, over everybody in the Jewish nation. Now, Jesus had a much greater fulfillment did come to pass. It's not just going to be over Israel, it's over all of the nations of the world. But the high priest didn't have any problem understanding the implication. And so he was infuriated at Jesus for claiming to be that Son of Man in Daniel. And so, yeah, there's no secret here for sure. And Matthew's account doesn't focus on the Messianic secret nearly like Mark's does. And in fact, it was from the confession in Matthew 16, when he asked, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? That it says from that moment on, Jesus began to predict his arrest and crucifixion by saying, the Son of Man will be delivered up, and they will. The secret motif is not nearly like that in Matthew, though there are a couple of places, if I'm not mistaken, that Matthew mentions where Jesus says, now just go and take your sacrifice to the temple, but don't tell anybody what's going on here. But anyway, I appreciate you bringing that up. But it's fascinating. And of course, the whole thing we're driving at is, what do you believe about him? And, do you believe that he is the one exalted over with all authority in heaven and on earth, which is how Matthew ends his whole gospel. All authority has been given to me, Jesus said, in heaven and on earth. Okay? Well, you might say, yeah, I believe that. I believe that Jesus is over heaven and earth. Now we just have to ask ourselves, do I live like it? Is that really what I believe? And if I do believe it, am I living in cognitive dissonance by saying, yeah, I know he's going to rule, or he rules and he's going to judge me one day, but that's for disaster, isn't it? Because what I go into is the implications if Jesus is truly the Son of Man and if you truly do believe in him. And that's the last half of the handout that has to do with discipleship, what it means to be a follower of Jesus. And Jesus starts out in Matthew 16 by explaining what it means for him. What does it mean for Jesus to be the Son of Man? As I just mentioned, Jesus says the Son of Man is going to Jerusalem and to be delivered up into the hands of sinners. And they're going to spit on him and they're going to strike him and beat him and they're going to kill him. Now he will be raised from the dead, and that's when the glory takes place. He will ascend to the right hand of God. But then, how does Matthew 16 end? You want to be my disciple. What do you have to do?
Take up your cross.
You have to take up your cross also. So I have a cross, but so do you. In other words, this world is no longer your home. You are a follower of me, and that means that you're going to face a world that's in opposition to you. But the hope is glorious because I'm going to rule over the universe. And so it is fascinating. And that's where we can basically end our discussion. And that's without getting into the rest of it. Maybe I'll preach that sometime later. Give me some material. But look in the middle of the page. So we left off there where I mentioned Matthew 24:30 and Matthew 26:63. And then I say, those who confess this fact, this is little Roman numeral 3 in the middle of the page. Those who confess this fact will enter that kingdom and will rule with Jesus. Now, this is where we ended last class when it was brought up about Daniel 7 and the predictions there where it says the kingdom will be given to the saints. I thought the kingdom was given to the Son of Man. It was at the right hand of the Father. Well, it's given to him too. So how do you put it all together? And I have like 1, 2, 3, 4. I have like 5 or 6 verses that you can study on this that talks about the fact that we will rule with Christ. I mean, the Bible says in Revelation 22 and verse 5, they shall reign forever and ever. Talking about those who are in heaven, those who are Christ's. And so there's a sense in which we do have rule, But it's not, obviously, it's not like Christ's rule. He's the king, and we are originally intended when we were created in Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 28. We were to rule over the creation. And if we did it correctly, if Adam and all of his descendants would have done it correctly, the garden would flourish, and the garden would grow, and humanity would flourish, and so forth, and continue to grow. But it wasn't to be. Adam and Eve rebelled against the Lord, and they fell into sin, was kicked out of the garden, so to speak, and then we had to await the second Adam. And so what Jesus now offers us is what the garden was supposed to have evolved into, or grown into, flourished into. That is, a creation that had no curse of sin, a creation that was abundant with the blessings of God and the presence of God primarily. And that's what you get in Revelation 22, don't you? Is that Garden of Eden symbolism and description that Jesus has gone to prepare a place for us. And that's what Adam should have given us, but he didn't. But that's what Jesus will give us, because he's the second Adam. But it's also because he's the Son of Man. He's the only human being who has lived this perfectly obedient life, to wherein in him now we can have what we should have had in Adam, that we don't and never will in Adam. All right, that was the second bell. I appreciate it, and we will leave off there and pick up next time with a new lesson. Thank you guys so much for your attention, and thanks for the comments. We'll be dismissed.
Good evening. I remember when I had obeyed the gospel, but before I did, I used to have this mindset that I would have enough time to obey the gospel if Jesus came, right? Like if salvation was something that I could get myself ready for at some time. And I remember one of the times I was studying the Bible with one of my friends, and I realized after I'd been baptized that my baptism wasn't sufficient, because I didn't have the right understanding, if that makes any sense. And so tonight I want to just kind of maybe share Luke 15 with you. And there's 4 different elements of that chapter that I kind of want to maybe take a look at. The first one is, and I want to kind of just maybe give you a concept at which you can understand. And this concept is about the state of being lost, if that makes any sense. And so when we're looking at Luke, the first part of that chapter deals with the shepherd. And a shepherd has 100 sheep, but one of the sheep get lost. And he leaves the 99 and he goes, and he is all in on finding that one sheep, right? And what we can understand about the concept and the condition of that one sheep that was lost is that the sheep was lost and didn't know it, right? And when you really think about the condition of many people that are in the church, a lot of us are lost, and we don't know that we're lost, and we think that just because we've been baptized, we've got our ticket punched, right? But there are a lot of things, and we understand that salvation can't be earned, right? But that there are some things that we have to do to prevent ourselves from getting lost, and one of those things is baptism, right? And once you're baptized, you not only have to obey the gospel, but you also have to live a life that is acceptable to God. When you think about Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, when the Bible there teaches that enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many that go in there. And then the passage also goes further to say that straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. Right? And when you really think about everyone in this congregation, you can just look around, and we're not just picking on us, right? Because we're all among each other. But it's possible that not everyone in here is going to be saved. You know what I mean? Right? And when you really think about the concept, going on further in the book of Luke. Now we're talking about the lady who has the coin, right? She has 10 coins and she loses one, and she goes and she sweeps her house. And there we can understand about the condition and the mindset of the coin is that the coin was lost and didn't know it, right? And so we have the sheep that was lost that couldn't find his way back home, right? And now we have the coin that was lost that didn't know it. And then following on further through this passage, now we can go to the prodigal son. And the prodigal son I can identify with, because when you think about someone who's fallen away from the church, right? And when they have gone away and they've done everything that they've done, they've squandered all of their belongings and all of their wealth, and they've demanded everything be given to them. And somehow along the way, God gives them enough time to change the way in the era of the way that they're living, and they come back. That's what a prodigal son does, right? And not only is it a prodigal son, but it's also something that can be applicable and identified with every member of the church, because all of us go through those times in our faith where our faith is tested, we get discouraged and we fall away. But thank God that gives us the grace that we have the time to return to him, right? And then there's another individual when we talk about the prodigal son, and that's the brother. And the brother has this attitude that, hey, you've never thrown a party for me. You've never had a fatted calf, and I have been here and I have constantly been faithful, as if his efforts and his actions were pleasing to God. But we understand that the elder brother, sad as it may be, right? The elder brother was lost and thought he was saved, right? Because of his attitude. And so a lot of time what we have to understand is that just because we come to church, just because we're taking the Lord's table, and just because we're singing songs, that may not be enough for God. When he's commanded us to go out into all the world, preach and teach the gospel, because that's actually what our responsibility is, right? Not only is that our responsibility, but to be encouraging to each other and to be outgoing. And so let's look at this outline before we conclude, right? And so the first part of Luke chapter 15, we know that the sheep was lost and couldn't find its way home, right? And then we have the coin that was lost and didn't know it. And then the elder brother, the prodigal son, we have the prodigal son that was lost and found his way home. And then we have the elder brother who was lost and thought he was saved. And so that's really like one of the most fundamental things that we can think about as far as a condition of being lost. And at some point, we're all going to identify with that. Because the scriptures teach us that not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, is going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. Right? And on that day, God is going to say, depart from me, ye that are workers of lawlessness. I never knew you. And of course, there's more in that passage. But the truth is, we're not going to have time to obey the gospel when God decides that he's going to come and rectify. And correcting the way that we live, the Bible teaches us that in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 10, we're all going to have to stand before the judgment seat of Christ to give account of the things that we've done in this world, of our bodies, whether they're good or evil. That's just the real truth. And so if you are among this number and you find yourself needing to come before the congregation and ask for forgiveness, or needing to put the Lord on in baptism, after you've heard the word, faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. The Bible also teaches in Luke chapter 17, right, that we're supposed to repent. And it also teaches that we must be baptized. We must confess our sins before men. So if we'll stand together and sing, this is your opportunity to get yourself right with God.